It now. What do you say, Dr. Richa?
Yes, Dr. Ajit. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, let's
Okay,
start,
sir.
and then the people will be joining.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Rachna, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the HEOR Vanguard Conference, the forum for industry leaders to bridge science, technology, and policy. I hope the lunch break was refreshing and you're all ready back to join us. I'm Rachna, and I'm delighted to be your host for this afternoon session. So, without any further ado, let's begin the session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ashis Mukherjee, the global head of market access and reimbursement for primary and specialty care at Menarini Group, based in Florence, Italy. He brings over 25 years of leadership experience across global pharma companies, including Sanofi, Merck, and Biocon Biologics. At Sanofi India, he led multiple business units, managed revenues in over $70 million, and won several regional and global awards for excellence in marketing and access initiatives. At Merck, he drove market access and affordability strategies across India, the US, Asia Pacific, leading landmark projects like the HCV elimination playbook and innovative patient financing models. At Biocon Biologics, he spearheaded global access, pricing, and tender strategies for biosimilars and digital therapeutics. Currently at Menarini, he leads global access and reimbursement strategies, shaping pricing governance, predictive analytics, and launching readiness across key markets worldwide. So before we begin, I would like to inform everyone that we have a Q&A session after this, so please keep your questions ready. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Ashis Mukherjee, a visionary leader driving equitable access to innovative healthcare solutions across the globe. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction, Rachna. I
Thank you,
have
sir.
to share my screen, so it should work.
Sure.
Let me know whether you can see my screen.
Sir, we can see.
Okay, good. So as without further ado, let's get into the discussion. Thanks. And before that, I just would like to thank Richa and Dr. Ajit Singh also for the invitation. So it's a pleasure to talk to the participants here in this virtual conference for 3 days. Very interesting to be a part of it. So there are 2 parts of my presentation. One would we call it integrated evidence generation to support successful reimbursement strategy. The second part, which I'll cover, is all about leadership in market access. So what does that mean? How do you lead a market access as a function? And so there are 2 parts to it. So let's move to the first part, which is about integrated evidence generation and how do we support the reimbursement strategy. This is my disclaimer in terms of this is my own presentation, my own views, nothing to do with Menarini. And this is all provided as informational purpose only, and it should not be interpreted as a professional advice of Menarini, which I represent. So with that, let me understand whether how many of you would understand what is the market access objective. It's pretty simple, straightforward. Now, what it says that market access needs to ensure that patients get the access and the benefit of any new innovative products, services, medical devices as quickly as possible. So that's the job of market access. Why it is important? Because in order to generate or to get one product, an innovative product in the market now, I think by any stretch of imagination, you can imagine it costs billions of dollars. If it sits in the shelf and it does not reach out to the patients, that is the purpose of that product, then we are not doing our job. It doesn't make any sense if there is no access to the patients, the new innovation which we can bring in the market. So I'll repeat what I said. This is important for you to remember that we need to ensure patients can access the benefit of medical innovations as quickly as possible. Now, all of these lines are extremely important, but it is not that simple, straightforward. Of course, I need to mention that following the regulatory approval in each country, region, and each region, country has got a different pathway to do the regulatory approval. So let's look at that pathway first. So what if you move from the left to the right, you see starting from the lab to the clinical studies, and then the third pillar, what we call, or the third hurdle called regulatory approval, because all of them are important. So your clinical studies also should make a meaningful, statistically significant endpoints, which shows that it is better than the standard of care, or in terms of its efficacy, safety. And then, of course, you go to the regulatory bodies, like in Europe, where I come from right now, which is EMA, Medical Agency, Europe Medical Agency. So you get approval, FDA. Similarly, each country has their own regulatory bodies. Now, once that is done, the next part, which we call it the fourth hurdle, is to then our role comes in there, the market access role. And that role brings us the product to the patients finally, which you see at the right. Now, in order to do it, we have a couple of challenges. If you see on below the graph that there are budget constraints of the countries, so they might say that innovation is damn good, I accept, but well, I don't have the budget to fund this for the reimbursement. Pricing pressures, resourcing, it's a huge challenge. Then, of course, all of these lead to the delays. So therefore, our main role is the other two pieces which you see, to prepare for the health technology assessments, and also to support and plan strategically how early we can start the launch planning and for a successful launch of the product. So remember, we will again, in terms of, we'll refer to this as the market access as the fourth hurdle after you cross the first three hurdles before you reach to the patients, because finally, the patient is the central part of all that what we do in the pharmaceutical companies, because finally, if the product doesn't reach to the patients, we have failed in our job. Now, in terms of the different types of markets, what we call typically archetypes, depends on the healthcare funding, who funds it. Now, left to the right, if you see there are markets which you call the reimbursed market, that means what we call sometimes even single payer market, like most of the European countries, UK, Japan, Korea, a couple of examples which I have given. So there, the government, the authorities, they pay the entire amount. So there is nothing called co-pay or any out-of-pocket expenses. Take for an example like Japan or UK, everything is taken care of. In Italy, where I come from, everything is taken care of. It is not only the hospitalization, but also your daily medications. Like somebody on statin or anti-diabetic drugs, that is also reimbursed and it's free. There is no cost. Then there is a non-reimbursed market. When I say non-reimbursed market, that most of them are non-reimbursed, like 80%, 90% non-reimbursed. Like typically you have India, many African countries, CIS countries. It's not very, it is all out-of-pocket expenses. And then there are third bucket, which is like somewhere in between. They're trying to go into the reimbursed segment 100%. Because of the budgetary constraints and other restrictions, they're still somewhere in between, and we call it the Thailand and the Vietnam. These are the two countries which I can think of. Now, if I move further, and now going into the more evidence generation, this is pretty, important and critical. It's becoming more and more critical looking at the way the environment is changing. And what it says that earlier we were like each function within a pharmaceutical company is like your medical affairs, regulatory affairs, market access, marketing, commercial, all of them, they work in silos. And each one of us, in pharmaceutical companies, as you know, we thrive on data. Now, what we say that we need to shift from a siloed past to a collaborative future when we think about generating the evidence, what we call it value, to ensure reimbursement by addressing access barriers. Now, access barriers It's extremely critical here to remember, because access barriers are multiple access barriers are there, and particularly in Europe. And also there are markets in Asia like Taiwan, Korea, Australia. They would ask you, very difficult questions, looking at your clinical data, your economic data, or even humanistic data. So they will ask you questions when you submit your dossier. And they may say that please clarify this. So it is extremely important to see that, and not only that, each HTA process in each country is very different. So you need to really think collaboratively across all the functions. And how do we build the value story, the value narratives for the payers or the authorities, what we call it payers in market access? How do we build the value story so that the authorities are very clear that what value this product brings in compared to the standard of cares, and therefore they're willing to reimburse at a particular price. Now, this is important that it seems that there are a couple of studies which we looked at, and they're almost like, say, half of the commercial launch failures. When I say the launch failures, means compared to the forecasted or the planned, what they believe that it would achieve, it could not achieve. So that is what we call it a launch failure. Imagine the forecast was we will do like 1 billion within like 3 years. And after 3 years, if you see somewhere you are at 30 million or 40 million, we say that the launch definitely was not successful. Or the first year launch is extremely critical because a lot happens in the very first year. And 50% of that launch failures is linked directly to the lack of market access. And that is because of inadequate value generation, value planning. And it is because of these reasons. So therefore, now you understand the importance of generating value evidence for a successful reimbursement. Otherwise, there is a huge chance of failing to get exactly what you planned. So it's a very critical fourth hurdle. And the HTA bodies, as I said, are becoming more and more critical about the value or the clinical or our value argument we bring to them. So therefore, this is extremely important. And you also remember that, and you may be knowing that also, in order when we fail, it's a lot of value, in terms of the investment is at stake. So therefore, it is absolutely imperative to ensure that we have got the right planning. Now, this is the old way, as I mentioned to you already, because in order to have a very cohesive value story, you need to be clear that you need to be much in advance. You need to understand what are the value gaps. Now, in order to do that, you need to go away from your old way, which was reactive and the siloed. So you get the clinical data at some point of time from all the randomized clinical trials, goes to medical affairs, and medical affairs has got no role in market access, particularly submission, reimbursement. So they will sit on the data. By the time we get the data, it is too late for us. So 6 months, 8 months, 9 months before the submission, if we get the data, there's not much we can do. And therefore that leads to the failure. And then therefore and it is because of then we find the gaps in the value story much later during the entire process. So what we are saying the solution is in a very integrated approach and also very proactive approach. Start early. And the earlier approach was very slow, much delayed at the last minute, looking at now more dynamic, proactive framework, which will basically try to be proactive because you need to anticipate, knowing fully well, for example, how Germany will look at your data, how UK will look at your data, how France, Italy also will look at your, Korea will look at your data, your Australia, PBS will look at your data. So you need to anticipate, you need to engage with them. We need to understand that, okay, fine, if this is the way they are going to look at the data and this is my data, what are the gaps do I have and how do I fill in those gaps? And this is what we call it as a new way, which is more proactive and more integrated across all the functions. And to me, this is the most critical piece now And going forward, it will become even more critical piece in a very changing, rapidly changing environment across the world in terms of the way we are, the assessment or the, because in Europe, if you recall, we have now joint clinical assessment. So they are going to do like not each country will do the HTA. There is a joint clinical assessment. So are we ready for it? How are they looking at your data? So this is important. Now, remember that a successful IEG plan, this is not just a particular study. This is a very strategic integration of multiple your evidence streams. Now, each pillar informs the others, creating a holistic, compelling narrative of value. Now, this is each word of this sentence is very, very critical. Super critical. I cannot re-emphasize this, because if they do not talk to each other, it is not integrated, it is not well synergized, entire thing will fall apart. And by the time we get to know, we go to the pairs and we check with them, well, this is my value narratives, how do you see that? And if they say, oh my God, there are multiple gaps, and you don't have the time to generate data, because you know that, and you will appreciate to generate data, it takes a while. You need to look at all kinds of data available, right from your, which is like now here, if you see the 5 pillars, what we call it, the first is your own randomized clinical trials. So how did we do the randomized clinical trials? Is it with an active comparator? Is it with only placebo? How big is the sample size? Is it statistically significant? What is the p-value, which is the hazard ratio? No, this is extremely critical. Did we meet the primary endpoints, the secondary endpoints? And all these primary, secondary endpoints, is it aligned with what payers would like to see? They said no. I mean, for example, just to give an example, many a times, and it is much simpler example to give you, when you say that your cholesterol lowering drug reduces the LDL-C, many payers in Europe, they said, so what? Now tell me whether it makes any kind of difference in terms of the mortality or morbidity, which is your more impact on the overall health of population or a patient. So they are not happy with your LDL-C reduction, because they say that many drugs, right from statin, they do the LDL-C reduction. Prove to me that this particular drug reduces the risk of having cardiovascular events. Now, if you do not have that data, you are in actually not a very strong position to get the reimbursement or also to get the right price. Come to the real world evidence generation or evidence. Now, this is also becoming more and more important for the payers and the authorities. Now, what kind of data which you looked at with these EMRs and demonstrate the real world effectiveness versus other products. So this is another very important piece. The third piece is the economic evidence. Have you done your thorough analysis in terms of your cost effectiveness, in terms of the budget impact, all kinds of health utility or cost minimization, all of these models, does it stack up? And then finally, what kind of patient reported outcomes, particularly the health related quality of life outcomes, and it is also becoming much more important today. Third, last piece, which is also, I must say, this is never underestimate this, because sometimes we are blinded. We go look at the data without looking at exactly what the payers and the stakeholders are looking at it, what they would like to see that. So this is also important to engage with the payers much early during the process is the key. So usually in Europe, for example, almost like 1.5 years, 2 years, even if we do not have the phase 3 complete readout, you need to go and check with your payers to say that, well, this is my data. This is what we are planning to do this. What do you think about it? Where will you position our product? This is our belief. So this is extremely important. I'm not going into the details of each one of these points, but just to tell you, these are on the left-hand side, which you see the first the column. There are 4 pillars, 4 domains: clinical effectiveness, economic evaluation, patient and the social aspects, and the unmet medical need. And what are the key requirements in the middle? I think many of you would know this. When you're looking at the clinical effectiveness, what you're looking at it, So between, for example, placebo control versus an active comparator, of course, active comparator kind of double-blind placebo, double-blind crossover randomized clinical trial has got more scientific evidence compared to a plain and simple placebo-controlled trials. Randomized clinical trials is a gold standard. So each one of these, like what are the key requirements which you see for each one of these domains, and what kind of real-world evidence, real-world data generation application which are available. You are aware of the cost-effective analysis, budget impact models, what kind of PR instruments which you can actually measure before the launch, and you can submit as a part of the dossier. And of course, you do the literature review, what you call SLR, TLR, which I'm sure you must be aware of. Now, if I move further, so if we do all of these things well, what happens? Of course, we can minimize the delay of the launch. So therefore, the innovation is available to the patients. Those who are eligible to be treated with the drug can have an access to the drug quickly. We get an enhanced reimbursement in terms of the size of the population, and we continue to create a sustained value. And how do we plan? How early do we start the planning? There are 3 steps. Usually, we normally start with the kickoff with all the functions in one room, and we say we map each one of their data requirements. Once you have that alignment, you need to then create the prioritization because you may have number of the data requirements, but you need to prioritize which one, like 3, the top 3. And then you say, how do we develop all the 3? Can we develop all the 3? I mean, can we build all of these 3? And then finally, you need to execute and then keep tracking this. So there are 3 steps to start this entire process. Now, this gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of from the phase 2, earlier the better. The integrated evidence generation is the best way to do this, is to get engaged much early in the clinical trial program, like phase 2. When the phase 2 data is coming out, you should give your opinion or value that, okay, fine, if you go to the reimbursement, these are the criteria they're looking at. Are you measuring those criteria? So therefore, you think about this from the phase 2 to phase 3, you look at about the integrated evidence, you then plan the strategy, then you refresh somewhere in the launch, have we got whatever we wanted, and you keep refreshing. Because as I said, remember, the environment is changing for market access, reimbursement. So you need to be ahead of curve that what the countries are looking at it. And then, of course, as I mentioned there, it cuts across all the commercial functions, and regulatory, medical affairs, all the functions it cuts across. So everybody should be aligned here. Everybody should be in one room when you have this kind of discussion. Now, this is my first part. And the next, I think, couple of minutes, I wanted to spend on leadership in market access. And remember, and this is a big shift. Earlier, market access used to be a doer, like, you just do perhaps a couple of steps. You do the HTA submission, you look at the pricing negotiations, and then finally you say that, okay, it is all done. Now, mark this very important thing. Now, the leadership role of a market access is a strategic influencer. And it's a combination of your technical mastery, that means the way you look at your technical part of it, and of course, your ability to influence the organizational leadership for the success in 2025 and beyond. Now, why am I saying this as strategic influencer? Because market access, still remember, is an evolving function. When I say market access, it includes all these stakeholders for market access. This is the part of the ecosystem for market access. You have the payers in each countries, each region. You have got HTA bodies. They are almost similar, I would say, payers, insurers, because it depends on which country you're talking about. Your payers could be different because he finally funds the reimbursement. Then HTA bodies, who typically the technical people, they look at your data carefully. Then you have got the patient access groups. This is also another piece which is becoming more and more vocal, and they have a very strong influencing ability for a reimbursement in Europe, particularly. There are many focus, the patient groups now, advocacy groups are available. Then there are IDNs who are finally the providers, particularly like in UK, you have this guy, the clinical pathways, real world data generation. Then you have the regulators. They look at the safety and the efficacy. Then you also finally have the physicians. Now, this is all that you need to do. I mean, you can imagine the role of a market access cutting across all these stakeholders. So it's a pretty complex ecosystem, and this ecosystem is not static. I'm repeating these words. It is not static. It's very dynamic. It's changing almost every month. Some new resolutions, some new laws coming in, either to make our life much more difficult, or somewhere there could be some ray of hope. So what are the various pillars of the leadership? One side, you need to have your evidence generation. And through the evidence, you can clearly show the value as a leader. And then you need to strategically align with your leadership. And finally, you go to the local markets. So you have a global plan, global strategy. And that you break it down in bit size for the countries to adapt, because their situation could be slightly different. So once you have a global strategy, global planning, global value generation, and then finally and global in terms of your even modeling in terms of ICR, your cost effectiveness, budget impact, and then finally you do the local adaptation. So what are those technical masteries? So let's look at each one of them. I call it a hard skill. Of course, you need to be very strong in advanced economic and financial acumen. Your mastery in health economics, outcome research is absolutely must. Strong quantitative financial acumen, navigating the payer contracting, performing sophisticated financial modeling, and ability to the gross to net. So all of these things come into your ability to look at the data and analyze. And then, of course, not only that, you need to be even better in the context of changing the landscape with the advent of AI. Now, AI is actually coming, and I would say this is another very, very important thing which we must be good at. And we also we see the importance of it. And so data science and the predictive analytics expertise is also very critical. And last but not the least, the important part is also pricing strategy, value-based contracting strategy. So you have got, these are the hard skill. When I say the pricing strategy, you need to do the analogs. What kind of analog analysis? You looked at the last couple of years, what kind of launch in the same space. So again, you're doing the analysis, but you are also looking at what kind of value-based contracting you can do. So it is just not the price. Like, are you looking at some kind of risk-sharing agreements? Now you say, no, I only do the first part, but I'm not aware of the last piece. Now, market access, the leader cannot say that. A leader has to have all of these three skills to be a leader in market access. So you can see it actually takes into account of all of these technical expertise. Then let's look at what are the soft skills. And this is, to me, it is extremely, extremely critical in today's context and going forward. The first is the policy influencing. Now, we know that, particularly in Europe and many other countries, the shaping the guidelines of any particular disease, like here, this is very guideline-driven treatment algorithm we have, which is called treatment pathways. It's not that you do whatever you feel like with your patients. So there is a very clear guidelines. Now, how do you shape the guidelines? And for that, you need to be mindful of who are the stakeholders, right from key opinion leaders, key thought leaders, scientific leaders, at the same time, some of the policy makers. So for example, the European Commission in Europe, the stakeholders there is very important. Then there are multiple other industry bodies that are important. Various industry, other platforms are important. So what kind of policy shift are we expecting in future? What kind of funding it might have to support a particular disease, like a rare disease, cancer, or maybe like even I would say anti-infectives, because antimicrobial resistance is becoming a huge problem across the world. So we need to be good at, so not only, which I said in the previous slide, the three technical part of it, which is the hard skills, this is another piece, and then cross-functional orchestration. So if you are not good in collaborating as a leader, it's very difficult to operate in market access or to lead market access in a company. So you should be extremely strong in leading medical affairs. And when you do this, it is not, remember, this is not because of the hierarchy. It is because the way you bring the value in the discussion. And that would give you the leadership edge over others. And finally, this even also you need to be comfortable, very, very confident to speak to the CEOs, or various very senior leadership in the organization. And you need to understand that for them, you need to communicate in a very different value, which the new product will bring in. So you should do all of these things well. Your strategic influence, which is extremely important. And now this is just a kind of a spider diagram, and you see on the left hand side a small cartoon which says earlier we were like a gatekeeper. We do the approval of the reimbursement dossier, we go through it, we say yeah, it is good, go and submit. And then from there, we are saying that we are moving towards the value architect position. So we are creating the value for a successful reimbursement strategy. So you see the strategic thinking, cross-functional influence, value communication. These are the soft skills. Similarly, policy pricing, HEOR, payer HTA knowledge are some of the most important skills one should have as a leader if you want to become a value architect. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. So let's say what are the 3 key takeaways. Now, I love these 3, the rule of 3. So the first thing is that the consequence of lack of securing reimbursement, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, for any new innovative drug is a significant to the tune of few billions of dollars. And remember, if this fails, there are some small biotech companies can go bankrupt to that extent. Okay, they go bankrupt. So let me highlight that. So this is extremely critical for us to remember that. So therefore, the consequence is pretty significant. So therefore what? Therefore, we need to be collaborative. We need to then focus on generating evidence, value much in advance so that we are able to, and our risk of not getting the right reimbursement comes down drastically. And that's our job. That's the job of, and that is what we do through integrated evidence generation. And finally, that is what I already mentioned. Our role is evolving market access and the leadership in market access from a typical gatekeeper to value architect or a strategic influencer. So this is, I think, the end of my presentation. And maybe I would like to close this with a small quote. Many of you have already seen it. And it reminds me also that if we cannot unlearn, relearn, then we'll become irrelevant at some point of time. So with that, thank you so much. Waiting for question and answers. I guess I'm on time.
Yes, Ashish, an amazing, wonderful session. I so wish I had the opportunity to learn this at the earliest stage of my career, but nonetheless, it was so mesmerizing listening to you, Ashish. I think people have started asking. Rachna, would you like to ask?
Ma'am, should I read the questions?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So Sharmila has put up some questions, right? In your experience,
Yes.
what are the most common? You can please read out them to Ashish.
Okay, sir. In your experience, what are the most common barriers faced when generating integrated evidence for market access, and how can teams proactively overcome them?
Yeah, that's a very, very relevant question. So what we see that as the main key barriers is the way particularly the lack of understanding of the payer needs very early stage by the companies. Imagine an US company developing a product, but they would like to be successful in Europe or in Asia. without any understanding of what the payers in Europe or payers in, say, Australia or Korea, they are looking at when they do the HTA. As a result of that, what happens, the way you design your clinical program may not satisfy the payers. For an example, just to give an example, in Germany, if you want to succeed, they do not like placebo-controlled clinical trials. But if your plan is to do that, and there was no plan to put an active comparator, they are not very happy. So if you, with that, now you come after like phase 3 and you say, hey guys, now there's a, there's a product, there's an asset, this is an innovative product, but well, this is a placebo control. Now, this is one such barrier. So the designing the clinical study, the program, and the right clinical program in terms of the matching the needs of the payer. So if it is not matched, that is, to me, is the biggest barrier which we face. In every day, I face this. Second barrier is that sometimes even the data what we have, it is also looking at, particularly in terms of the duration, for example. Like, somebody says that, oh, okay, you have this, as I mentioned to you, LDLC reduction is there, but the cardiovascular outcome data is not available. So that is another gap. So many times you are looking at some of the endpoints which are not not relevant for the payers. They want to look at more patient-reported outcomes, more as an authentic endpoints. So these are the two. And the third one, we get it also quite late. Sometimes the data comes quite at the end of our submission. So that is also we need to be mindful of. These are the three key barriers which we face. And of course, the funding also of some of the products, like of course the cancer care, and also with a rare disease, you may get a funding, you get a better population, faster access. But some of the other products, the delay in getting market access, there are countries like for example, Portugal. Once you submit your dossier, it might take even 18 months to 24 months to get it reimbursed. So 24 months when the rest of the other European markets have already got the product reimbursed and being used by the patients, in Portugal, it will be delayed by 24 months. So the patients in Portugal will not have an access. So the delay, the entire process takes huge amount of time. So these are the couple of barriers which we face day in and day out. And this is true in Asian markets as well. So though I'm talking about Europe, this is true for Australia, could be true for Japan. Japan is a little faster, but you need to be prepared how Japan looks at your the data, the HTA process.
Thank you, sir. And we have one more question. Akanksha Verma is asking, good afternoon, sir. Thank you for such an insightful session. What evidence would you give to emerging HEOR or market access leaders seeking to drive innovation in UK reimbursement strategy?
UK.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the UK is very interesting. In UK is like absolutely, it is called cost effectiveness driven. So if you are not good at getting that your ISR within the threshold, and this threshold also has been there for many, many years, the same thresholds, the industries are not very happy with the threshold. But you need to be very good in terms of building your cost effectiveness model very, very strongly when you submit to the NICE. And if you are above threshold, your reimbursability, the opportunity comes down. And so therefore you need to give, and then when you're building the cost effectiveness model, before that you do the SLR, TLR, and wherever you do not have head-to-head comparators or comparative trials, then you need to do maybe an indirect treatment comparisons or new meta-analysis. So you need to go through crunching a lot of data. So get your cost-effective analysis. And then when you go to the regions, to the hospitals, then again, you need to think of the budget impact, because they're looking at their budget and they need to manage within their budget. So in UK, to succeed, the reimbursement is to start early, work on your cost effectiveness model. Wherever you understand there are data gaps, see how do you breach the data gaps and get a very watertight your cost effective models out, because UK is very clear, very straightforward in terms of the cost effectiveness analysis.
Yes, sir.
I see there are
And we
some
have one
questions
more
even in the chat also.
Yes,
Yes,
Ashish. Maybe Rachna, you can read Shanmuga's question. It's an interesting
yes,
one. Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Shanmugapriya has a question. Sir, you mentioned that leadership in market access requires navigating both internal and external forces. For someone at an early stage career with strong vision and willingness to do the hard work, but without access to capital or a network yet, what actions build early influence and credibility in this field?
Very, very good question, because we all face, because when I started in market access way back in 2011, honestly, even my managing director in India never understood exactly what I do. So he hired me, but he was not sure exactly what I do. So he kept on asking me exactly, Ashish, tell me, can you explain to me what exactly do you do in India at that point of time in 2011? I'm talking about 14, 15 years ago. Now, therefore, my guidance would be to you is that as an early leader, you need to be very strong with what you are saying, particularly your data. So the first thing is your data. You need to be at the top of the data. And you also must know about the knowledge about the pairs. These two things are very important. What pairs are looking at it and what you have in your hand. These two things. If the pair expectation is A, but in your hand you have B, it doesn't match. And this you should be able to communicate to your leadership. They may have a huge expectation from B, but you say, no, but actually the pairs are looking at A. So you need to be able to communicate to your leadership, say, hey, you know what? Because we come under huge amount of pressure. There's a no, Ashish, because we open the door. If we fail to open the door, the marketing has got very less work to make it successful. So you need to be very clear to communicate to them very early in the process. As I mentioned, the planning starts almost 24 months before the launch, and you must insist that at least before 24 months, we should sit down with the data together, look at the gaps, the value gaps, start building your narratives, do early cost effectiveness model, whatever phase two data you have, and then communicate effectively to the because sometimes what happens, I have seen in the leadership, they do not understand HEOR. He may be a commercial guy. It's our role to explain it to them in the language they understand. So it is not, that's a soft skill which I spoke. So it's not about talking about a whole lot of jargons about our HEOR because, okay, I don't know what you're talking about, ISER. What is ISER, by the way, Ashish? Okay, so the one side is your knowledge about your product, the data. The other part is the knowledge about the pairs, they're looking at it, and how do you breach this? And then you flag, these are the barriers, these are the drivers. We have this, which is good, but this is which we need to breach. And therefore, you can communicate effectively to your leadership.
Thank you, sir. And we have one more insight. A fascinating session on market access. To be a strategic influencer, could you please enumerate 3 hard and soft skills? And also, how would you navigate presenting yourself between payer and pharma company that you represent?
On the three already I presented, maybe you can once again can take a look at that, because hard skill and soft skill both I mentioned in my 2 slides. So I because of the paucity of time, I don't want to repeat. But the fact is that in the hard skill is all about technical part of knowledge about all of these, which I mentioned, your HEOR, then your patient-reported outcomes, and then AI-enabled strategies. So you need to understand all of these. And when you're talking to the payers, the most critical part in Europe and elsewhere is early engagement with the payers. Try to understand their mind. If you do it 6 months in advance, you will fail for sure. It's a perfect recipe to fail. This process starts maybe 1.5 years in advance. So you start 24 months. In 6 months, 8 months, you come to like a draft, my first initial strategy, whatever data I have based on that. With that, go to a pair, and there is a process to do it. Every at least in Europe, there is a process, very laid out process. You fix an appointment, you give them the pre-read, they do their own thing, and they will come back to you on a virtual meeting or a face-to-face meeting. They will tell you, well, this is the data, then these are our concerns. You have a placebo control. I'm not very happy with it. I will compare with the lowest priced generics. So your innovation, which has costed you a couple of billions of dollars, but the price which they are willing to pay you maybe in few cents because they don't see any value in your product. So therefore, these are the important. So early engagement with the payers. What are those influencing areas? What they're looking at it to understand that, and then you go back to your board, drawing board, and then plan accordingly, and then submit. This is important. So proactively work, engage with the payers to make it a more watertight, successful reimbursement plan.
Yes, sir. And dear participants, if you have any more questions, please drop in the chat box or you can unmute yourself too.
And maybe Richa, another thing which I can do in case during the 3 days, if there are any more questions, you can write to me and I can go back and then you can share with the participants. That is also possible.
That would be wonderful, Ashish. We really, really thank you for taking out time for us. And Rachna, maybe we can close Dr. Ashish's session now. And sir, thank you
Yes,
so
ma'am.
much for being there with us.
Thanks a lot. Wish you all the very best for the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so
Bye.
much, Mr. Ashish Mukherjee, sir. It was an insightful and wonderful session. So now it's my absolute pleasure to move on to the next speaker of the day. So we welcome Dr. Mayura Deshpande, the Medical Director for the UK and Ireland at Ferring Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Deshpande is an accomplished physician with extensive experience across clinical practice, research, and medical affairs leadership. She began her journey with the NHS, later serving as principal investigator at Medinova Research, where she has led several ethically driven and patient-focused clinical trials. Over the years, she has held key leadership roles with renowned global pharmaceutical companies such as Almirall, Lund